Is Pratika Rawal too dependent on Smriti Mandhana?
Last Monday, we talked about Harleen Deol batting at number 3 for the Indian team and how that might be a problem in itself and how a strike rate might be a problem for the Indian team. And a lot of you guys highlighted in the comments of how Pratika Rawal might be another problem for this team. And this was evident once against last night when she failed against England. For someone who had an average of 50.1 and a strike rate of 84 before the World Cup, she's really struggling during the World Cup. Before we get into the whys and break things down even further, hit that subscribe button and here's a promo from our membership.
Around how West Indies is no longer the great West Indies that it used to be. He talked about how cricket in the West Indies functioned as an agency of colonial oppression and at the same time,
Someone who for the longest time is also now known as a Black Bradman.
now what happened was there was a delay in his immigration forms and that basically helped change cricket history, so to speak. As he said, every boy who felt his worth as a batter called himself George Headley.
And there were 3 black men who were outscoring all the white people in their team. And not only that,
Because it's the first time that West Indies beats England at Lord's.
son, going into their own backyard and taking the chickens out of the coop and frying them on the front lawn, for me, son, the empire collapses right there.
In the build-up to the World Cup, Pratika Rawal had been in excellent form. Coming into the team in place of Shefali Verma, Rawal exceeded expectations not only in terms of how she was able to perform, but also in the kind of opening partnership she was able to establish with Smriti Mandhana. In the 17 matches that she played pre-World Cup, she scored 802 runs at a very impressive average of 50. Along with this, she struck at 84 and she also had 106 50s in her name. But what was even more impressive is how formidable an opening partnership Pratika Rawal was able to form with Smriti Mandhana. Because in the 17 games that they opened for India together, they scored more than 1,300 runs at a very impressive opening partnership average of 76 and they had 500 plus stands and 750 plus stands in this period. In fact, they were so successful in this small period of time that they became India's 6th most successful pair as a batting unit. But from there, when you come to the World Cup, it hasn't necessarily been the same story. Not only has Pratika Rawal struggled to put in the performances, but especially her strike rate has decreased. Because in the 5 matches that she's played in the World Cup, she scored 186 runs at a decent average of 37, but her strike rate has come down to 70. Although the partnership with Smriti Mandhana is still doing decently, because in the 5 matches, these two players still averaged 57 as an opening stand, there's still a lot of questions that are being raised on Pratika Rawal, especially because of how slow she's been going.
And this is why we start digging a bit deeper with Pratika Rawal's matches before the World Cup. Now, if you look at her strike rates against nations before the World Cup, you will really understand why she's struggling in this World Cup, because the only 2 nations that she does well against is Ireland and South Africa. Against Ireland, she has a strike rate of 108 and against South Africa, she has a decent strike rate of 82. Apart from that, if you see Rawal against Australia, England and Sri Lanka, she strikes in the 70s, which is not at all impressive. Unfortunately for Pratika Rawal, we have to compare her to her opening partner Smriti Mandhana, who's also the best opener this year in terms of runs. But we compare Pratika Rawal to Smriti Mandhana because if you look at the best series that Pratika Rawal's had in terms of averages and strike rate, it's against Ireland, where she's averaged 103 and had a strike rate of 108. Even here, Smriti Mandhana has a much higher strike rate than Pratika Rawal. Smriti struck at 152 against Ireland with an average of 83. And we emphasize this because in no series that Pratika Rawal has been a part of has she struck at a higher strike rate than Smriti Mandhana. And like I said before, the problem of batting very slow was evident against England in England and the Australia series just before the World Cup. You know what the problem is? When you're a batter with a low strike rate, you depend on the other batter to pick up the run rate. And because of that, you also get the confidence to score some runs. And it almost seems like Pratika Rawal is very dependent on Smriti Mandhana in terms of scoring runs. Because if you look at all 50 plus scores that Pratika Rawal has scored, not once has she scored a 50 plus score when the team has lost Smriti Mandhana very early on. And this is very specific in the sense that when they haven't gotten a 50 run stand as a partnership, Pratika Rawal hasn't gotten a 50 in that situation. And this trend even continues in the World Cup because the 150 plus score that Pratika Rawal did get was after a 155 run partnership with Smriti Mandhana.
If you have a glance at this data, the first insight that you might get is that Pratika Rawal needs an opening stand of 50 for her to be able to go on and score 50. However, if you interpret this as Smriti Mandhana needing to score 50 runs so that Pratika Rawal can come in and score a half century, that's not necessarily true. We looked at matches where Smriti Mandhana has scored more than 50 runs and also less than 50 runs and seen how this has impacted Pratika Rawal's performances. In the case where Smriti Mandhana crosses a score of 50, Pratika Rawal in these matches has averaged 49.8 and struck at 84.4. But when Smriti Mandhana gets out for less than 50, it does seem seem to impact how Pratika Rawal performs because her average comes down to 44.8 and her strike rate also comes down to 78. And this is where the problem starts because when you're in a situation like this, what's happening is that Smriti Mandhana is clearly the more reliable opener. Now, this makes sense from the standpoint that she is the more experienced player, but for Pratika Rawal to consistently not be able to step up and perform at the same level that she does when Smriti scores a 50 is the issue. And so what's happening here is that there is a direct correlation not just in the team's reliance on Smriti Mandhana but also on her other opening partner, that's Pratika Rawal, and how Smriti Mandhana performs. And this correlation holds even when you lower Smriti Mandhana's score. In the instances where Smriti Mandhana has got out on a score of less than 30, Pratika Rawal in these cases averages just 32.3, clearly showing that she is someone who is affected by how Smriti Mandhana plays. And this is where we get into the crux of the issues. Aside from relying on Smriti Mandhana, there are some key factors that are affecting how Pratika Rawal is approaching her innings. There's three main things that stand out. The first is how her performance has been in terms of her strike rate, moving from the power play to the middle overs. The first thing we look at here is phase-wise play and how Pratika Rawal did pre-World Cup, moving from the power play period to the middle overs. In the power play phase before the World Cup, she averaged 83.5 and struck at 78. Along with this, she had a dot ball percent of 62.3. However, as she moved to the middle overs, the period from overs 11 to 25, she picked up not only a strike rate but she also reduced her dot ball percentage. Her strike rate went up to 82 and her dot ball percentage came down to 49%. Whereas in the World Cup, this transition has not necessarily been smooth. Where in the World Cup, she's averaged 101, struck at 76 and has a dot ball percentage of 63%. However, it's the transition from the power play period to the middle overs of 11 to 25 in the World Cup where she's really struggled. Because here her average comes down to 24, her strike rate also comes down to 64 and her dot ball percentage goes up to 61%. And her figures are some of the worst in this middle over period in the World Cup because she has the worst dot ball percentage, the third worst strike rate amongst the top 10 run getters for any batting position in these middle overs. What makes it even worse is that while she is going slow, she also has the worst average, which means that she's getting the least number of runs at the slowest rate in this World Cup. And if your argument is that you can't possibly compare an opener like Pratika Rawal to middle order batters who might do better in the middle overs, I have a stat for you on how she's done against openers as well. Because here too, not only does she have the second worst average, but she also has the worst dot ball percentage and the worst strike rate. And this falls in line with how Smriti Mandhana has performed in this World Cup. Smriti Mandhana hasn't had the best World Cup so far, and this is also reflective in how Pratika Rawal has done in her matches so far.
And this is where we get into another problem that Pratika Rawal has, and that's been magnified in this World Cup as well. And that's a problem against left-arm orthodox spinners. Because if you look at the matches leading up to the World Cup, she played 17 matches, out of which 6 times she was out to left-arm orthodox spinners. That is 35% of the time she's gotten out to left-arm orthodox with an average of just 15 and a strike rate of 73. Not only is it the worst average she has against any type of bowlers, it's also the worst strike rates that she has. She also has a dot ball percentage of 52.3. Now, even in the World Cup, out of the 5 matches she has played, on 2 of the occasions she has gotten out against left-arm orthodox. Here too, she averages only 16 with a strike rate of 59. And these numbers are just horrendous. Now, here's the thing, right? You would usually introduce spinners right after the power play or right at the end of the power play. And we have already seen that her averages during the power play are great because she's able to get through without getting out. Now, if you look at the overs between 11 and 15, usually when spinners are introduced, before the World Cup, she had a strike rate of 68 and a dot ball percentage of 53. Are these the most impressive numbers? Absolutely not. But if you compare these numbers to her World Cup numbers, you will be shocked. Because in the World Cup between the overs of 11 and 15, she has a strike rate of just 38 and a dot ball percentage of 71. And this is also after facing 60 deliveries, which means she's not only not able to score any runs, she's not able to rotate strike, and also sometimes giving her wickets away. And you as an opener, especially when Smriti Mandhana is not able to do well, cannot afford to do this. Also, when you have Harleen Deol coming in at number 3, who also starts off very, very slow. So a strike rate of just 38 right after the power play doesn't do any good for the Indian team, especially when you have already lost a wicket. Now that is basically the problem with Pratika Rawal, right? Even though her averages might be decent against certain nations, it's the strike rate that's letting her down. Because even if you look at her most productive shot until the World Cup is of course her drives, but against the fast bowlers she only strikes at 68, and against the spinner she has a strike rate of 72. Even here she doesn't stand out or is impressive. And this is also where Pratika Rawal does get a criticism, is the fact that she's not able to get those stars that the Indian team needs, especially the starts that the team got leading up to the World Cup. She of course has the skills and the talent. It's about being able to execute those shots and not hitting it straight to the fielder, and being smarter about strike rotation and making sure that the Indian team doesn't dig themselves a hole, especially after the wicket of Smriti Mandhana.
This has been a video on Pratika Rawal and why she's been struggling in the World Cup and what it means for India moving forward. If you enjoyed this video, definitely definitely leave a like, leave your comments down below on what you think of the current situation and what India should be doing about it. Share this video with your friends and everyone following the World Cup. All of our links are in the description. Definitely give us a follow on Instagram, Twitter, and also on our WhatsApp channel. Join our membership if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.